delight in seeing God's gift of sex debased. Seeing beyond the petri dish of our own stories, we see the entitlement of predominantly heterosexual men that necessitated the need for the Me Too movement, the realities of children being sex trafficked, and the sex industry's goal to eroticize the degradation of women. We live in a world of sexual violation. Sexual violation will be healed to the extent to which it is acknowledged. This is why it is critical to find a holistic diagnosis of the sexual madness of our time. The diagnosis must include lust, personal trauma history, and present-day futility. But it must also address the at times deplorable dimension of the human condition. Judith Herman, professor of clinical psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, wrote, "The desire for control over another person is the common denominator of all forms of tyranny. Totalitarian governments demand confession and political conversion of their victims. Slaveholders demand gratitude of their slaves. Religious cults demand ritualized sacrifices as a sign of submission to the divine will of the leader. Perpetrators of domestic battery demand that their victims prove complete obedience and loyalty by sacrificing all other relationships. Sex offenders demand that their victims find sexual fulfillment in submission. Total control over another person is the power dynamic at the heart of pornography. The erotic appeal of this fantasy to millions of terrifyingly normal men fosters an immense industry in which women and children are abused, not in fantasy, but in reality." Herman speaks to the heart of the demand issue with stunning honesty. She invites us to abandon the perspective that women in pornography are simply participating in an enjoyable career, and instead see that the sex industry demands total control over the bodies of women and children in order to produce its content. It is men who must decide whether to accept a world that will continually demand the sexual degradation and possession of women. Violence against women is an issue of not only individual perversion, but also justice. Our collective demand for this material fuels an industry in which women and children suffer violence and death in order to deliver men the corrupted desires of their hearts. Our wounds invite us to the gentle path of healing, but our perversions challenge us by asking, is violence against women the way we wish to atone for these traumas? As Franciscan priest Richard Rohr said, "If you do not transform your pain, you will always transmit it. Always someone else has to suffer, because I don't know how to suffer. That is what it comes down to." Crimes against women. Historically, men attempted to portray prostitution and pornography as victimless. The underlying foundation of this belief is that women exist to serve the needs of men. Our language to refer to a sex buyer has classically been the word John, meaning any man. On the other hand, the language we use for women and children trapped in sexual exploitation is more derogatory. Whore, hoe, prostitute, tramp, and the list goes on. The message is clear. Buying sex is common for all men, but the real gender to blame for this issue is women. The statistics are overwhelming for women in the life of prostitution and pornography. Approximately 90% of these women have suffered sexual abuse, and the average age of initial involvement in prostitution is somewhere in the range of 14 to 18, which in many cases is lower than the age of consent in the United States. There is something seriously wrong when we blame those in prostitution for their lifestyles, when legally they are not even old enough to give their consent for sex. This is rape. Additionally, 58% of American prostitutes will report violent assaults at the hands of clients. As you might imagine, the great majority of sexual assaults go unreported. Sadly, 92% of women in prostitution report a desire to leave the life, but cannot due to not having enough food or money. The homicide rate among women actively engaged in prostitution is 17 times higher than the rate of females in the general population. And after the review of multiple sources and analyzing 9 different data sets, Another study concluded that prostituted women have the highest homicide victimization rate.